This is part 2 of a conversation between Nate Vainio of the Something to Gnaw On podcast and me, Luke Taylor, of the Cross References podcast. And we're going to pick up where we left off last week. You can hear the beginning of the conversation by going back to that episode, or you can just join it right here if you'd rather. Let's get back into it.
Okay, so we've spent a few minutes on the chapters 1 through 3. We skipped ahead to chapter 24 and the passing of his wife. Is there anything else in there that you think of as noteworthy in terms of, and not necessarily in the prophetic sense? We'll get to some of that in a moment, but I think in the preparation of the prophet, in the preparation of the person, is there anything else in those chapters that you see developing by the time you get to 24?
You know, there is just a little. Well, yeah, like I said, it is not till 24 that you really get the spiritually mature Ezekiel. That he said, you know, hey God, here's the blank check to my life, and says, I'm just going to do whatever you say from here on out. So there's a interesting passage in chapter 8 through 11. God kind of takes Ezekiel spiritually. He's over in Tel Aviv. God comes over. It's kind of strange how it says this. Picks up Ezekiel by the hair and carries him off. Now it's like he carries off his soul in a sense, or his spirit. Carries him off to Jerusalem and says, "Hey, I just want to show you what's going on over here in the city of Jerusalem. So let's go look inside the temple." And there's idol worship and all this kind of stuff going on in the temple. And God says, "I want to have my executioner angel go and start marking people for slaughter." And Ezekiel's just kind of a bystander in all this. He's just like watching. And he gets and it doesn't tell us exactly how many people the angel's marking for slaughter, but Ezekiel turns to God. He says, "You're really going to kill all these people?" You know, so Ezekiel still hasn't quite got it yet. Or he's having a very human response. He's like, "Well, God, you can't just wipe out everybody in the city." You know, he's like, "Oh, you're going a little overboard here." So we just see these kind of moments from Ezekiel where he's kind of like questioning God, you know, saying, "Are you going too far with this whole judgment thing?" But God's like, "Well, let me show you what's going on in the temple basement." And I mean, it's just the ridiculous idol worship that they had going on, you know, in the midst of all that, you know, stuff that maybe people didn't see on the outside, but it was like even the temple's been polluted.
It was like that particular episode is like peeling of layers. It's like, I'm going to go to this spot and I'm going to show you what's going on. We're in the outer court. Now we're going to move, and there's it seems like there's a progression, you know, of what's going on, and he just kind of keeps going. I think there's 3 different, if I'm not mistaken,
those different court levels.
Yeah, there's different court levels, but specifically in those chapters, I believe there's 3 different references of him, of the Lord peeling that back.
Oh, okay,
and it's just interesting. It just kind of keeps. You think that's bad. Yeah. You know, let's go now to the inner court, and maybe I'll post it in the show notes, the actual references there. I read them. What's interesting is for this entire book, I will honestly tell you that I did not read the entirety of this. However, unplanned and unrehearsed, you've gone to these chapters, which are probably I think there's 5 or 6 chapters right in there, like 7 through 12, or
it's like this massive vision that he has.
And it's just wild because if you're listening in and you haven't, you know, when Luke says, you know, that God grabbed him by the hair and carried him off to, you know, it's kind of a vision. It is a very intriguing, because remember what we're talking about here. You know, you got Joshua. I got my J Bible heroes out of order here. Jeremiah in Jerusalem, and I'm not even sure that Jeremiah is Jeremiah around at that point?
He is. He's in the city.
So Jeremiah is in the city as this is going on. You got Ezekiel in Babylon or Tel Aviv.
Right.
Abib. Yeah. Gee whiz. Me and my geography. Anyhow, carry on. And God gives him a vision, transports him, whatever you want to call that, which is just radical and wild. I mean, he did the same thing with Philip in the book of Acts, you know, so this isn't a completely abstract possibility for him either to actually have been transported there, or B, have a vision. I don't care. I'm not going to break fellowship with anybody who thinks differently on that, and I'm not going to make that an issue. But either way, he's seeing something very real in the moment. And I mean, it's just talk about a radical encounter with the divine perspective on what's going on. And out of this, is he still a little stubborn until 24?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think so. That was I think everything you say, like you're saying, we're peeling back all these layers.
Yeah.
But God takes him through these experiences, and once he gets on the other side of it, he says, "Oh, well, now I understand you a little bit better, God."
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some visions in there that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it just hit me. We're talking about him. We're talking about Ezekiel struggling with his being 30 and the call a few chapters earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There are those moments in life where you see something and then God peels something back and you see the reality of what's going on.
Right.
And I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on in this.
Well, there is, because he's probably thinking, the temple's where we go to worship God.
Yeah.
But what was actually going on in Jerusalem is they had brought all these idols into the temple.
Yeah.
It said they had women out there weeping for Tammuz. That was a false deity. And they were actually using God's holy temple, and they were using it to worship gods of frogs and all kinds of crawling creatures. Imagine if you think of the greatest church in America, whatever that could be for you who are listening, and you're like, oh, I would, if I could, I would. I love watching this preacher on TV. If I could go to that church, I'd love to go visit. And then you show up there, and you see some kind of like pagan worship going on. Think of how that would rock your world. that would in a bad way, but that would totally be that would totally knock your socks off. You wouldn't even know how to interpret that. And that's kind of what Ezekiel's going through with the vision of the temple. He's like, God, why would you destroy your temple? Well, let me show you what's going on inside my temple and how they profaned it. Yeah. And so that's probably the mindset he had.
Yeah, I'd imagine to some extent it solidifies his ministry. Okay, God's got me doing something here. I mean, I as we're having this conversation, and I realize it's people will be listening into the podcast here, will be kind of listening to this I'm still processing.
As we're processing.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a solid take on this, but I do find it interesting that the struggle and the wrestle that he has with things, and even at the same time, you don't have to not struggle and wrestle with things for God to use you in that moment. Now, granted, I'm sure there's a level of effectiveness that is possibly in question, or correlates in one way, shape, or form. But I'm just intrigued by the human dynamic of it.
Right.
It's
well, to look at Jonah.
Yeah.
When you're a little kid, you read Jonah's story, you're like, Jonah, what's your problem? Do what God said. But as you go through that as a little bit older, as a teen or an adult, you really study the Assyrians and how brutal they were.
Yeah. How
scary it would have been to go and preach to their city. It becomes pretty relatable by Jonah's running the other way.
Yeah.
I can totally understand where Jonah's coming from on that. I probably wouldn't want to do it either. So these we got to remember these prophets are just human beings.
Yeah.
And they wrestle with the same things we wrestle with.
Yeah. And hopefully we learn, that there's we learn the Lord can be trusted.
Yes.
And man. Oh, here's a question for you then. Did the Lord ever hang a prophet out to dry?
Lord ever hang a prophet out to dry? It depends on how you... I want to say no. Even if they got killed in the line of duty, they went to heaven, they fulfilled their service.
Yeah.
So, but that's what happens when you're called to be a prophet, is you're saying, God, whatever you want to do with my life, it's in your hands. And that it's like Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
we have to be willing to lay our lives down when God calls any of us.
Yeah.
So it's a call to die to self and become that living sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I guess like I said, just to reemphasize, I'm struck by the humanity of it,
mm-hmm.
the humanity of a situation, the what's the word I'm looking for here? The redirection of life
mm-hmm.
at 30. You're probably looking at more of a midlife crisis, given the age
right.
of in that era. 30, if I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking that 30
mm-hmm.
was kind of like a midlife dynamic. You've worked everything for that stage of your life, and you think you're going to finish life, and your mark on this world is going to be made by your preparation to this point and your execution from hereafter.
Mm-hmm.
And totally blindsided by the choices of other people.
Yep.
Think about the fact too, that the mere fact that God is wanting to use Ezekiel should give us some indication as to how Ezekiel had lived his life up to this point in the midst of this other stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's
that's why I said earlier, I don't think he's a bad guy.
No. Yeah. So there's a word I'm looking for, and it's this, I'm missing it, but there's this misdirection that happens there where, I thought I was going this way, and then mm-hmm. all of a sudden the Lord takes me on this left turn, and there's a confusion element. But the Lord's leading them, mm-hmm. and it's a beautiful thing. And I guess I'm just kind of hung up on that human dynamic of this whole story.
Right.
As I read through this and I hear you talk about that. So,
well, that's another thing that makes him so relatable is there's people listening right now. And I think from the stories you've told, you've been through some stuff in life. You've been through some hard times, and you probably came to points where you wondered, can God ever use me again? Has God given up on me? Am I ever going to fulfill, maybe I thought God wanted me to do this, and now I can't do that. And you think, well, was all that time before, was all that preparation wasted? And Ezekiel's story shows that God might have a plan for you that's different from what you thought it was going to be. But all that stuff you went through in the past, that wasn't for a waste. That was just, I'm using that for a different purpose.
Yeah.
Well,
there's some things in life that there's not a bachelor's degree for.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a master's or doctorate.
Yep.
There's I once heard a pastor up in Montana say, he said, my wife and I, how did he put this? My wife and I have been married, I think it was something to the effect of, my wife and I have been married for 50 years, and we've been through the school of hard knocks, and our colors were black and blue. There are just some things you don't learn in a textbook. You don't learn in a classroom, and you learn by what you watch God walking Ezekiel through in this particular case,
mm-hmm.
and or walking him through or walking him out of,
mm-hmm.
however you want to form your grammar around that.
Yeah, right.
deal there, but
you got to go through it.
Yeah. There's the experiences. So
yeah.
Well, let's shift gears slightly here and look at. So again, just quickly reiterate. When we kind of look at these books, we're looking at, okay, who's the author?
Mm-hmm.
What do we know about the author? Who are the other players in the game? Who are the other? We've got Jeremiah, who's prophesying at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen now another one who is during that same time frame? Is there any correlation or overlap with Daniel?
Right. Just
pragmatically speaking, that you see in both texts.
Yeah. Well, there is a call out. There's a shout out to Daniel in Ezekiel. Let me find it here.
Because it's okay. So when you're talking about a shout out or a call out, you're
mm-hmm.
talking about Ezekiel making a reference to Daniel's ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, while you're flipping pages there, I've mentioned too, when you go to the book of Daniel, Daniel has a reference or a shout out, if you will, at the end. I think it's Daniel 9, 10,
mm-hmm.
11 there, where he references
Jeremiah.
the writings of Jeremiah.
That's
and
right.
That kind of comes full circle there. So these guys were operating at the same time in different, different geographical locations, but they were well aware of each other.
They actually were.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so yeah, there was the 3 invasions from Babylon, like I was mentioning at the beginning. Daniel was taken in that first one. Now, his book comes after Ezekiel, but he was taken in the first one. That's where his story starts. So he's taken in that first. Nebuchadnezzar sees these Jewish worshipers. He's like, those people are kind of interesting. Let's take some of them back home. So just a small handful of some of the royal family, and Daniel was one of them. So he's taken away. Then that second invasion, they take away 10,000, and that's where Ezekiel was part of that group. But Daniel was over in Babylon. As you read his story, he's in the actual city of Babylon, the capital, and he's making a name for himself. He gets put in charge, high in command of the entire government over there, right alongside Nebuchadnezzar, because he was such an exceptional young man. So it is kind of interesting. In Ezekiel 13, there's a verse where it says, where God's talking about Jerusalem. He says, even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would only rescue themselves by their righteousness. And so he's saying, I wouldn't, if they were in the city, I would save them, but I wouldn't save anyone else. So he's talking about how bad they were. But Daniel gets a shout out there right alongside Noah and Job, just because of how he'd proven himself. So,
yeah. Oh my. Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. So so we talked about Isaiah being, having a lot of messianic prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
And in the overview episode that I did, there was a quote from Chuck Swindoll that I had that, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't have it in front of me. The guy I love. Do you ever listen to
Chuck Swindoll?
Yeah.
Well, we have him on KNEO radio, so yeah, he's been a staple of our morning lineup for years.
Yeah, I love listening to him, and the fact that he's a Marine. On top of that,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he served. He served in. Well, I should hesitate to. I think he may have served during World War II. Wow.
Okay.
But he wasn't a lifer or anything like that. But he served a few years.
Yeah.
Anyhow, long story short, that type of stuff intrigues.
Well, sure.
If you've listened to any of the episodes, you would understand. Anyhow, but he makes this comment about the fact that, and I want to come back to the theme of Ezekiel here in a moment. And that's kind of where I'm getting off track here. But in the book of Isaiah, he says the theme is redemption, salvation. But you read through the first 39 chapters, and the first 39 chapters read doom, destruction, judgment.
Yep.
And so how do you balance, so much doom and destruction? And he says, the quote pretty much is this: having read the book, one might wonder about the strong presence of judgment that runs through the first 39 chapters when the theme is salvation.
Mm-hmm.
How can the two coexist? The presence of judgment indicates its necessity for salvation to occur. Before we can have salvation, you must have a need for it. End quote. And so as I read through Isaiah and what have you, there's that dynamic of the theme of having that theme of salvation, but then you've got to muddle through the fact that there's so much judgment in there. And so I guess moving back to Isaiah or Ezekiel here, one kind of a 2-part question, and I'll kind of throw it out there at you, but one, what's the overall theme? And 2, does it have that same tension, which I think it does, but elaborate on it.
Yeah.
Does it have that same tension of having like judgment and redemption at the same time that Ezekiel has?
Right. That is it's very similar to Isaiah in that regard. I'll talk broadly and then I'll get specific.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, if you look at the outline of the book, it's 48 chapters. Right down the middle, 24 chapters. I told you that's the big turning point of the book. That's when Jerusalem falls. Up until that point, it's all judgment, doom, and gloom, chapter after chapter. Not a lot of sunlight. just all the reasons God's going to destroy the city. And then you get into, starting at chapter 25, it goes on for 8 chapters. Judgment, doom, and gloom on all these Gentile nations. And it goes through a whole list of them. And you get to chapter 33, and that's when the book kind of does that Isaiah thing. And it turns, okay, here's some messages of hope for the future. Here's some messages of restoration. But that's only the last third of the book. So the first 2/3 of the book, it can get it feels a little repetitive at times, or just feels like, man, there's not a lot of hope all through here.
Yeah.
Now there is a little bit. If I can zoom in on something, the darkest parts of the book, which is that big vision that I mentioned from chapters 8 through 11.
Yeah.
That is up till then, that's the darkest, that's the, God at his most negative. But that it ends with this message of hope of God saying, but I still love you. I want to bring you all back. It comes right after all this, some of the harshest language God uses. Then you get to chapter 16. Ezekiel 16 is, you were blushing a little bit about Song of Solomon a few episodes ago.
I don't know if I blushed. I was moving too fast.
You wanted to move right on through it.
Yeah.
So in that same spirit, I will not get specific, but Ezekiel 16 has some graphic language throughout it. If it was getting a movie rating, it'd be rated R. And yet it ends with this message of God saying, I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord, so that when I make atonement for all that you have done, you will remember and be ashamed and never open your mouth again because of your disgrace. But God's saying, I'm gonna bring you to a place where I'm actually going to change your heart and give you a new covenant. And that sounds kind of like New Testament, happy language, but it comes right after this chapter of God comparing Jerusalem's actions to a prostitute and going through some really graphic language. It is the darkest chapter of the book, but it ends with this message of, but I want to make a new covenant with you, and I want to restore our relationship, and I still love you. I haven't given up on you.
Yeah.
And you were this woman who made yourself dirty, but I want to clean you up and give you fresh clothes and all that. So he's painting this picture of the love that he still has for his people.
Yeah. I think the scary thing when you read through these is one of two things, where there's judgment not followed with anything, which is, I think, and I'm going out on a little bit of a limb here, so you rein me in if I'm wrong here, but when there's judgments against the other nations, I don't think that they're not followed up with, this is happening, but once it's over, there's a corrective dynamic in play so that our relationship can be right.
That's true.
So when those dynamics happen and there's not, that is not communicated, that's scary.
Yeah.
The other time that it's scary is when God just flat out doesn't talk. When somebody pointed out a while back that God didn't speak to Esau, or if he did, it wasn't much. And if he did, I probably ought to think about these things before I start speaking on air. But there's not correction with Esau.
Yeah.
Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Point in saying that is sometimes it's difficult to stomach or handle the difficulties that we go through, but to understand that in those moments, if there's correction going on, and the Lord is speaking in those moments, there's something much better on the other side of this, that God is orchestrating through these events and circumstances, this corrective process that so many times we just want to get out of and get away from.
Right.
But what you read in the prophets is there's a corrective process, there's a discipline process, there's a purification process, but the goal on the other side is always a redemptive. These things need to happen because you serve a holy God, and you've drugged so much sin and junk and other nastiness before the throne.
Right.
And we need to deal with that. But once we're done dealing with that, hey, it's all good. Let's and so it's tough sometimes to deal with those things, but man, when you do, and when you read through this, and I think that's the gist of what, or I shouldn't say necessarily the gist, but kind of an undertone of what Swindoll was talking about, that there's the salvation that comes, the judgment dynamic or the correction or the discipline. You got to know and understand that God loves us. And on the other side of this is this redemption and restoration. And it's not just salvation for the eternal, your eternal address.
Yeah.
It's, what did Jesus say in John 10:10? Finished it up with, I came to give you life.
Right.
But life.
Abundantly.
So much more above and beyond what you could fathom,
Not just for heaven someday, but for right now.
And so, it's I just think that as we look through the prophets, it's imperative that, we understand God accurately. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's tempting to look at, or in our humanness or our worldliness, or even maybe there's a demonic element of to say, oh, God's being vindictive, or God's, and it's, you got to understand that God stays in the game pursuing us in this corrective process because there is a love and desire to have intimate fellowship with us.
Right.
And so there's, I grit my teeth and I kind of tense up with this in an excited sense to say, these moments and these difficult things that we go through, you got to be careful and cautious to not get caught up in that being the totality of what's going on in life.
Right.
There's a bigger picture. There's something beyond.
We get tunnel vision.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, shoot, we get an attitude like Ezekiel at the beginning of the book, where we're on the side of this happened and this happened. God forgot about me,
right?
And I should have been doing this, and I should be in the temple, representing the people before the Lord. And I, and
we always think we have such good ideas for how our lives should go.
Yeah, I've been telling the Lord about mine, and anyhow, more than anything, I just rant on and on about that. It's just so important that as we go through these. On the one hand, it highlights the fact that bad stuff's been done here, and you've got to account for that, and it has to be dealt with.
Yeah, there's a cost.
But the fact that God is willing to work through it with us is an absolutely beautiful thing. And yeah,
I was thinking that verse as you were speaking. The Lord disciplines the one he loves and punishes every son he receives. And that discipline, that is a sign that God actually cares about how we're going to turn out.
Yeah.
Same reason that you discipline your kids, I discipline mine. It's because we care.
Yeah.
It's because we're trying to chip away at those things that are going to be bad for them 10 or 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And get them on the right path. And God's got to do that with me. And he's got to do that with Ezekiel.
Oh, my. So just backtrack and rehashing here. We kind of cover the author, who he is, who's Ezekiel. We cover some of the contemporaries. We touched on a little bit of Daniel, a little bit of Jeremiah, a little bit of Isaiah as a predecessor. Talked a little bit about the kings. When you go through these books, as I'm going through this crash course through the Old Testament, those are the things when you go to any book, those are some of the basic things that you want to look at. We talked a little bit about the apocalyptic dynamic of this. Really haven't got much into that, but I want to throw you a curveball here. You ready for a curveball? Okay. So for those of you who cannot see, which is going to be everybody, because we don't do this on video here. We're sitting in a little studio. Luke has his Bible open, and I'm sitting back like I'm in a lounge chair shooting questions at him. But no, literally, he's got his Bible laid out here. Close your Bible for a minute.
Close my Bible?
Yep.
Okay.
So you have been in Ezekiel as far as a podcast for 46 episodes, 49?
I'm working on my 49. Yeah, 48 have come out.
48 have come out. Okay. Yeah. So when the dust settles on this is what I call a gun to your head question.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like,
when I get through it.
Yeah. When the dust settles on this, what is your impression of God?
What's my impression of God?
Based on Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Based on the book.
I know this probably hurts, but we're going to cut it off right there for today. And so if you're enjoying this conversation, I hope you will come back for the third and final part next week. And if you have any feedback, or if you're mad at me for cutting off the conversation right here where I did, then you can leave a comment, or you can send your hate mail to crossreferencespodcast@gmail.com. Well, this has been Luke Taylor of the Cross References Podcast and Nate Vainio of the Something to Gnaw On podcast.